We are very happy indeed to welcome this evening Mike Meadows. Mike, good evening. I can see you. I can see you're with us. I can't see your face yet, but we have a few IT gremlins this evening. But when do we not, to be honest? So, Mike, welcome. We're delighted you're here. The Head of Planning and Public Affairs at British Land, who with Landsec have recently put out a report on how to reform the planning system to deliver more brownfield development. We're really looking forward to Chris's interview with you in the second half of the show to hear more about that and your thoughts on the subject. But Mike, before we commence, I have to ask you the usual questions, namely, where are you calling us from? What have you chosen as your theme this evening, and what, if anything, are you drinking?
Evening, Charlie. Evening, everyone. I'm very impressed that you're broadcasting from the back of a taxi. I'm in York House, which is British Land's head office, just behind Marble Arch. My theme this evening is starting out. And to give you a bit of colour, Charlie, I was at the WPA lunch this afternoon, and we hosted two young people from Westminster through Young Westminster Foundation, which is a charity we support, and two young people who are at college and are just starting out in their careers. And in fact, one young lady who was 18 was very interested in politics and met Alistair Campbell, who was the speaker. And I thought that was really inspirational. She probably didn't expect that when she woke up this morning. So that's my theme, starting out and what inspires us when we start.
Fantastic. Right. Well, maybe we'll explore that theme a bit further during Chris's interview, or some of the questions. And of course, can I make the usual reminder to members of the audience to, by all means, post questions in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll try and pick one of those to put to you, Mike, later on, assuming my connection still works. So I've rather taken over Paul's role as the mobile operator and the back of the car operator on this show for now, but I won't lie down. That's that. Anyway, we must crack on. And Sasha, it's been a relatively uneventful week in the field of planning, has it not?
It has, Charlie. I'm in outside Norwich in the Starbucks, and lovely to see you.
And you're going to tell us about the news in the planning world, are you?
I completely am. But before I do, let's ask Charlie. I mean, not Charlie. Let's ask Chris and Paul where they're.
Oh gosh, of course. Well, it's kind of obvious where Chris is, and they both got the memo. Where? Sorry.
Right, well, I'll step in, given that our host is obviously having a bad day. So I'm in Newcastle. So this joyous backdrop is from the Civic Centre in Newcastle that I was thrown out of last night at 6:30. So apologies for that, Mike. Hopefully that won't happen by 6:30. But if you find two burly security guards grabbing me and bodily, then that's the explanation. So I'm in Newcastle doing a redetermined inquiry. And I did my slots 2 years ago from this very room for the first version of the inquiry. So I'm looking forward to coming back in 2 years' time.
There'll have to be pretty burly security guards to throw you out, Paul. Chris,
I'm at home, as you can see, and I picked up on the theme of starting out. First thing you do when you become a barrister, you get one of those. And doesn't it make you feel important with your wig tint? As you can see, Presumption is wearing his. And another thing, when I started out, I don't know if you can see that, my dad gave me a stamp, which I then put on all my blue books. And so every single blue book that people see me with has that stamp on that my dad gave me, and just reminding me who I am. And if you've got my blue book, please give it back.
I got so excited about the new housing minister. I think there've been more housing ministers in the last 3 years, and that have been shows if we got planning news for you. But you're going to tell us about that. And the new housing minister, a 43-year-old ex-university colleague of Rishi Sunak, Lee Rowlett.
That's correct. I'm completely unqualified as he's a Lincoln College Oxford graduate, like you know. Yes, I mean, it does have to be said on a non-political basis that the housing portfolio, as Michael will confirm, must be one of the most important, frankly, in government. And yet, it reminds me of the Duke of Windsor being sent to Bermuda during the Second World War to get him out of the way. And the place the housing minister kind of resembles a place where people are put to be forgotten, where frankly it should be seriously one of the 10 most important positions in government. So let's hope that Lee Rowley treats it with the seriousness it should have, and let's hope that that is reflected in government. So yeah, I think it's the 16th housing minister in that many years. Frankly, I mean, it's a bit like the Spurs job. Frankly, the managers seem to come and go with enormous regularity. Sorry about that, Chris.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention, which is of course should be in the news, is that the planning fees are changing. Probably have got British Land a pretty fortune, Michael, in the next few years. 6th of December, there are new fees in place, and I think major applications going up 35% and other applications 25%. So I think that's the other newsworthy ultimately.
Indeed so, and that may perhaps lead in some cases to a uptick in amendments to applications, whether applications are on appeal, as a means of circumnavigating the uplift in fees. I've seen that issue arise in the last few days on a couple of matters. We're without Mary, I think for the simple reason that the login doesn't work, and we've got lots of WhatsApp, so we're desperately trying to get in. So we will welcome her to the show when she comes. She was going to be the first item, so we'll skip that, and I will cover the first case report. In short, Paul Tucker has managed to win a case in a shock news, but let's explore how he did achieve this fine achievement. In front of Inspector Haydenbore Jones, and it was a place called Bosham in Cirencester district, and it was a scheme for barracks for 300 homes. The main issues the inspector saw were the impact on highways and other infrastructure, the impact on 2 SACs, designated sites, and an impact on character and appearance, and the A on B. And thank you, Claire, for pointing out my, and indeed Simon, and indeed probably many other people that I've hilariously mispronounced, Bosham, as I shall now pronounce it. All won on all 3 issues, and the issue I wanted to dwell upon, because the one that aspect vision that seems to me to be of most widely known relates to the effect on of nutrients on the SACs, and 207 of the 300 units could be delivered without there being an additional impact on of nutrient loading of the relevant habitats, on the basis that the land would be taken out of farming, which itself was a nutrient loading use, and also that the remainder of the development could be offset by the taking out of further agricultural land on the relevant farm. But secondly, there was a deal, heads of terms are described in the decision, whereby the farmer would be effectively taking out of land, non-developed land, taking out of agricultural use, that is, the non-developed farmland, to offset the remaining 93 units, which is fine and well done to all concerned, because you got the consent. Little bit strange, isn't it? The nutrients issue is still forcing productive agricultural land to be taken out of productive use, and indeed rewarding, through no doubt suitable payment, rewarding the very farmer whose polluting activities have contributed to the nutrient issue in the first place. I think Tony Juniper, when he came on this show a couple of years ago, described that as the opposite of the principle polluter pays, the polluter gets paid. So 2 arguable perversities arising out of the nutrient issue in this case didn't stop the consent. As I say, well done, Paul and team, for getting it. But doesn't that rather highlight the need for a better solution, whatever that may be, to the nutrients issue? I know I sound like a broken record on that, but it is fairly obvious. So well done, Paul, and apologies again for mispronouncing the name. And if we don't have Mary, then we'll go, Paul, over to you to tell us about a case in Swale.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlie. Yeah, I made the same mistake in relation to pronunciation on the first site visit, and was immediately corrected and told that I would be tarred and feathered if I left Hampshire, having referred to it as Bosham. So I look forward to your next trip to Hampshire and the team photographs that you'll put on WhatsApp. So my case is a case in Sittingbourne. You can tell what's in my mouth, what in my mind, because I'd written sitting houses for some bizarre reason on my my scrawled note of paper. So it's a site in Sittingbourne. It's a decision of Mr. Inspector Major on the 6th of November, who granted permission on an appeal against non-determination for 380 houses and a few ancillary elements on the edge of the town, but very close to the Northern Relief Road, which locals will know is incomplete, and there's no money presently identified to complete the Northern Relief Road, which is one of the points raised by locals. Application May of 2022, appeal takes place in September 2023, and this is the unusual bit. By the time of the appeal, the authority had considered what it would have done with the application had it considered it, and Swale decided it wouldn't have defended the application. Had it still had the application, it would have granted consent. So it turned up to what turns out to be a one-day inquiry, accepting that permission should be granted. I'll just pause there before I go into any of the further facts. That's really important, because so often you get the situation that authorities believe that the reason that they have to put matters back to committee is to come up with reasons for refusal if there's an appeal against non-determination. No, it isn't. It's to say what you would have done. And there ought to be some provision, frankly, maybe in the cost aspect of PPG, to say that if an authority then resolves that they would have granted consent, that any cost application shouldn't follow from that point, because the authority should then be engaged in resolving to secure that. So something that's so often misunderstood but so important in terms of housing delivery. Well, by the time of the inquiry, that highways was plainly the main issue at the inquiry with the locals, and this issue about proximity to the incomplete Northern Relief Road, but also accessibility. It was a site that had been identified for mixed-use development in the local plan, but the employment aspect of the mixed-use development had been built out. And the locals were saying, well, one of the problems is there's an indicative yield in the local plan of 106 dwellings. Again, just pausing there, how infuriating is it when national guidance says you have to use land efficiently, and yet it becomes a main issue at an inquiry about whether or not an indicative figure in a local plan should be treated as indicative or as a ceiling. Heritage was an issue, landscape was an issue, quantum was an issue, but mostly highways was an issue. So the real point to take from this is that having granted consent, we need a system in which you don't have to stick an application in, wait 18 months before you get it in front of the inspector for the authority to say we wouldn't have defended it and we would have actually wanted to grant consent. There was some talk a couple of years ago about if an authority resolved that they wouldn't have defended, that it could have actually then drawn the application back to it and issued the permission. Maybe that's something perhaps we need to have a think about. So that's Sittingbourne, correctly pronounced as I understand it. Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks very much. I think the entire population of Bosham is going to complain, because not only have I mispronounced it, but you've mislocated it in the wrong county.
So tragic, isn't it? It's tragic.
But I think it is in England, at least. We haven't at least given it the wrong cousin.
Near Chichester, yes.
Yes, it's so village.
Anyway, my Zoom app is telling me that the host has disabled my camera. So you finally worked out that I have a face for radio. But the host has now asked me to start my video. There we are. So here I am once again. Mary, welcome. You've got a Scottish Gremlins just in time to...
Sorry about that.
That's okay. About a decision in the Cotswold district.
Yes, I want to tell you all about a case which was the product of an 8-day inquiry spread over from the 31st of January this year to the 11th of May into a new secure roadside truck facility by William Gilder Limited in the Cotswolds AOMB. Thank you very much, Rob. And this is a case where there were not only the appellant, the council, but there was also a Rule 6 party, the Cotswolds AOMB Residents Group. And this development was agreed to be major. And so the whole appeal really was very much focused on the application of paragraph 177 of the MPPF, and whether exceptional circumstances had been shown to warrant the grant of planning permission for major development in the AOMB. And the second issue was, of course, the impact on the character and appearance of the AOMB. So we're dealing here with a greenfield site with no public access, but which the inspector found contributed to the wide-reaching setting of the AOMB and to the overall tranquility of the AOMB. despite the fact that it was in close proximity to a major road, i.e. the A417, the inspector found that it was a dark and peaceful piece of land, and that heavy goods vehicles would pierce the rural character with their associated light and noise pollution, which would cause significant harm. And although the inspector acknowledged that mitigation was proposed in the form of landscaping and low-level lighting, it wasn't regarded as adequate. And so the inspector concluded that there would be a breach of local plan policies EN 2, 4 and 5 because the development would have a significant detrimental impact on landscape character, tranquility, and the special characteristics or the special qualities of the AONB. The appellant had prayed in aid circular 01 of 2022, that Department of Transport circular on the strategic road network and the delivery of sustainable development. And they called a representative, I noticed, of the Road Haulage Association to speak to the need for facilities for truck drivers. And the inspector accepted that there is a national need for roadside facilities, and indeed that there was a local need for truck stop facilities, but not a local need that was based simply on the distribution centre, which was already located in the AONB, which I think was the appellant's case. And as paragraph 177 required, the evidence looked at the extent to which this identified need could be met outside the AONB. And both sides agreed that there was a site which was potentially suitable to meet the need outside the AONB. To the north was land in the Greenbelt, but the inspector noted that local transport infrastructure is not necessarily inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. In other words, there might be opportunities in the Greenbelt. So the inspector concluded that it had not been sufficiently demonstrated that that the need could not be met elsewhere outside the AONB. And she concluded, in effect, therefore, that the appellant hadn't discharged the onus which was upon them under 177 to demonstrate that. She also concluded that the effect of on the environment and the landscape and recreational opportunities could be moderated, but only to a limited extent. And so overall, she concluded there were no exceptional circumstances to justify the major development in the AONB, and it wouldn't be in the public interest to grant permission. And then finally, she said, it's not in accordance overall with the development plan and the MPPF. And so, unsurprisingly, she dismissed the appeal.
Thanks.
So, thank you very much. Difficult case.
Yeah, interesting comparison with AONB and Greenbelt. Regular viewers will, of course, appreciate that the appellants probably missed a trick because there is a leading authority on roadside facilities they didn't call, a certain PG Tucker KC, who is frequent user of such facilities, as well documented on this show.
I don't, Charlie. I don't think they were proposing a hotel, were they?
No.
Which is particular subspeciality. Right.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Well done to Hashi Mohammed and Nathan McLaughlin for the Rule 6 party in that case in the Cotswold. Guilders I happen to know Guilders operate from the Cotswolds. They didn't need the truck stop. All their lorries go from the Cotswolds to elsewhere. It is a huge pleasure to introduce Mike Meadows. Mike is the Head of Planning and Public Affairs. That's an interesting combination. We're going to come on to that. At British Land and a member of the company's Development Committee. You're responsible for British Land's planning activities and government engagement across the UK. And you have over 19 years experience and you're responsible for delivering some of the biggest schemes. Now, everybody has heard of British Land, but that includes your first net zero carbon building, 100 Liverpool Street, 1 Triton Square, 1 Broadgate, 2 Finsbury Avenue, and heritage-led regeneration at North Folgate. So some of the biggest schemes in the country, British Land are behind those, and you're the head of planning there. Now that sounds like quite an exciting job for a planner. Is it?
I think so, Chris. Yeah, lots to keep me busy. And as you say, there are 2 parts to my brief. planning and public affairs. Lots of our local government relationships and engagement sits in planning. I think public affairs is quite a natural extension of that. By public affairs, I mean talking to national government primarily about planning and regeneration, but about lots of other things that affect the business as well.
Okay, and just for those that don't know so much, what does British Land do typically? We all know about the house builders and who they are, but what does British Land do?
We are a listed property company. We have a mixed portfolio of offices, which are primarily in central London, retail, which is national. We own property from Inverness to Plymouth, which I like to tell people in, government. And we are increasingly involved in the urban logistics sector, primarily in London. We recently got, I think, the largest logistics consent in Westminster, 150,000 square feet. We are involved in life science and innovation-based standalone life science developments and refocusing some of our campus assets towards those sectors. And of course, we do residential as well. We have a 53-acre master plan at Canada Water. It's a 10-year project and will deliver around 3,000 homes.
Okay, so obviously some very interesting projects. Now, the reason we've invited you on is to talk about this. This is a report that you put forward, and you've done it in conjunction with Landsec, and I think that's interesting. So, you're both competitors for the same sites around the country. You're both working in the same sector, but you've come together to produce this report to explain how you think the planning system should be changed to unlock urban regeneration. Why is that? How did that come about, this collaboration?
Yeah, we get asked that a lot, right? Why did we write that? Say there's two parts to that. Why did we come together to write it? Why did we say what we said in the report? First, why did we come together? The report is aimed primarily at policymakers in national government. Our businesses have a lot in common, particularly when it comes to urban regeneration. There's a lot of shared experience which inform the report. And we think actually when the businesses come together and the CEOs come together with a common voice, that's quite powerful. And I think, you mentioned the report. When we started writing it, we said we want this to be a discussion paper. There are recommendations. We are not saying, right, do these 7 things and everything will be perfect. We really put it out there because we wanted to have a discussion about how we reform the planning system to promote brownfield. And that's why I'm really glad that you invited me on, and it's good to do this and have discussions like this.
Okay, well, it's very well timed, isn't it? The government adjusted the standard method a couple of years ago to try and put more into cities, the 35% uplift, huge numbers. About half the housing in the country is going to come from cities under the current standard method. So housing is a big part of it, but this isn't just about housing, is it? This is about all forms of regeneration, taking sites and redeveloping them for whatever the best and most appropriate uses are. Is that fair?
Yeah, we are not a house builder. We are a mixed-use developer. We do have a large housing pipeline at Canada Water, but that is part of a much larger mixed-use master plan. And when we talk about urban regeneration, we're talking about housing delivery, but also the economic opportunity for growth. Okay,
so when we get into the report, it's got a number of different recommendations, and I want to go through those recommendations and understand why you've made them. But the introduction begins with quite a criticism of the current planning system. And of course, we've just had the Levelling Up Act introduced. So we've had yet another planning act, and quite a big one, although I quite like your description you gave me earlier that the act is less of a planning act and more of a camel. But you make the point, successive changes to the planning system have added multiple layers of complexity and uncertainty such that the system's default mode is to prevent or delay economic activity. Now, that's a pretty punchy thing to then be presenting to policymakers, ministers, and so on. It's a stinging criticism. Why? Why do you think that the system is, effectively multi-layered and uncertain?
So planning's hard, right? I mean, we wouldn't have written the report if it wasn't. And if you accept, if there is political consensus, it's around brownfield. I think broadly Conservative Labour support in principle brownfield development, but it is still hard going through the planning system. So we wanted to think about why is that, and how do you reform the planning system to make it easier? So one of the guiding principles for the report and the engagement with government was we need to come up with solutions, and that is the roadmap. But I think we also wanted to set out, what we see as some of the challenges in the current system. And two of those you picked up, Chris, this kind of successive changes and fundamental reform. Yeah, I think politicians like to criticize the planning system and want to fundamentally reform it. And we know that is hard. It takes a long time. It's contentious. And it soaks up a lot of the debate, actually. And we thought there are things that we can do that are kind of practical and deliverable, that don't need, the planning system doesn't necessarily need fundamental reform. There's lots we can do with the existing machinery. You mentioned the LoRa. It is a bit of a camel. And there's still lots of uncertainty, right? Because of the secondary legislation that is required to enact lots of what's in it. The uncertainty that still exists around the infrastructure levy, what the new deadlines for local plans will kind of mean in practice, and how authorities will engage. I think one area which could be positive is national development management policies. If designed in the right way, we think policy layering is a real issue because it adds complexity, duplication, and sometimes conflict. One of our recommendations is let's be much clearer about what goes in national policy, what goes in strategic, and what goes in local. Because often you have a national policy, the strategic policy one-ups that, and then the local policy one-ups that, and then you get this kind of policy and cost layering as a consequence.
Yeah, and then you just get endless debate about which takes precedent, and I'm afraid that just involves lawyers inevitably. So, but we'd agree with you, to be honest. The new national policies, or I certainly would, sort of Paul nodding as well, the new national policies, I know people think it takes away from local democracy, but honestly, we need clarity. We don't need 38 different greenbelt policies. We just need one. Okay, and the criticism doesn't stop there, though, and you'll forgive me highlighting that, because you're critical of design codes and the infrastructure levy as well. What's the problem with the design codes?
I have no problem with design codes in principle. And it being candid, we've done quite a lot of political engagement since we launched this in July, and that is one area where we get pushback from officials and politicians. And I think design codes can be useful. I think our concern is that often brownfield development is complex. It often requires intensification to make it work, and that requires creativity. And Adrian Penfold, friend, mentor, reminded me Canary Wharf had a design code, right? So you can do density with design codes, but it's whether you can unlock sites that need a really creative approach to planning and design and placemaking, or whether you can do that within design code, or whether the design code just becomes yet another policy layer.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. We're all doing, I certainly am seeing a lot more brownfield schemes coming across my desk, and the response is a bespoke response dealing with a whole series of constraints and levels and difficulties with contamination, and responding to edge of centre and then just, to the edge of suburban areas. And so a design code isn't going to really address that, is it? That's just looking for uniformity when you need creativity, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Now you go on to say, well, why do we need this change? And you made the point about the acceptability of development. You point to research by Ben Ansell at Oxford University that out of the 650 parliamentary constituencies, there's 55 only 55 where they're accepting of development and supporting house building, which I thought was a really interesting statistic. And your point is that research says those are all largely urban areas. What's the relevance of that then, please, that you've identified a cluster of areas where people are accepting of house building?
First of all, we just thought that was a pretty interesting stat, right? Only 55 constituencies and net supporters. So his research shows 51% support house building in those constituencies. Of those 55, 54 are urban. The other one, if anyone is interested, is Orkney and Shetlands. And do not ask me what is going on there. But put those guys to one side. And the other 54 are urban. So it kind of feels like that's quite a good place to start if you want to deliver housing. Start in the place where there is more underlying support.
Okay. You go on to say, we can deliver more homes and jobs and better quality of life for people living in towns and cities. But, there are a lot of people who want a house, a detached house or a semi-detached house, a garden and a garage. Are you saying everybody should be living in flats in cities?
No, we're not there. Occasionally people do DM me on LinkedIn. I think we have this kind of anti-Greenfield agenda. We don't. I promise we are just pro brownfield development. We did, after we put the report out, we commissioned some follow-up research with development economics to look at the scale of the opportunity for brownfield development. We looked at 16 of the largest urban areas in the UK and what could be delivered on brownfield. That is the one, and thank you very much to Steve Lucas and Development Economics for their work. We looked at three scenarios, kind of base, aspirational, and stretch. The stretch was sort of loosely based on the 35% urban uplift, and what that report concluded was you could deliver 1.3 million homes and 1.1 million jobs on brownfield land in those 16 urban areas by 2035, and that does not meet all of your need. And actually, one of the conclusions is we should be doing more on brownfield, and there is a huge opportunity to do more on brownfield, but you still need green field and green belt release, grey belt release, as it may be, under Labour. So we think you need both. That's the conclusion of the research, certainly, and recognise that people want to live in both, Chris.
Okay, now I want to go through the recommendations because you've set them out in a very clear way. Politicians do not want long reports. They want nice, clear things. And so we've got your individual recommendations. Our IT guy, Rob, is on holiday, as if that wasn't entirely obvious already from the start of the show. And hence there's no slides. So I'm just holding up bits of the report. But if we go to the first one, define and focus on urban regeneration. And you're suggesting a very specific change to the NPPF, aren't you? You're suggesting that we have a new category of previously developed land, which is brownfield urban regeneration. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. And I'm conscious, I just said policy layering was a bad thing, and then we are recommending another designation. I think the reason we think that is important, the PDL definition is pretty broad, right? So we think there could be a definition of a more explicit definition of urban regeneration, but also a recognition in national policy that is a desirable outcome, right? And then you can start to build a kind of stronger presumption around that. And it may be important if the infrastructure levy comes in, maybe you can link that urban regeneration definition to tiers of the infrastructure levy. So we think there could be a role for that.
Okay, so the purpose for the change in definition or the subsection is to then put into the the main policies, a presumption in favour of urban regeneration or urban regeneration first or something like that.
Yeah, recognising that it is a desirable outcome of the planning system.
Okay. Your second recommendation, you talk about quick wins. Well, politicians always like that. And pilot new ways of working in progressive authorities. What is it you have in mind there? What do you want to see change in local authorities?
When we were designing up these recommendations, we were very deliberate that they should be practical. They should be deliverable. I think the majority don't require legislation. They shouldn't require public money. We wanted them to be things that the government, either this one or the next one, whoever that might be, could just pick up and implement pretty quickly. And this was part of that, really, this idea that you don't need to fundamentally reform the planning system. The machinery is there. Maybe you've got to tighten a few bolts. Maybe you've got to kind of loosen a few bolts. So, the recommendations in there around things like standardization of planning application documents, automation and validation. I think government, recognizing that governments are doing some of this already through their pilots and their digitalization.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the lure is setting that up. There's more standardization of application forms and so on. But you do also say replacing ineffective planning performance agreements with something else, a service level agreement. What is your criticism of ineffective planning performance agreements?
Look, they can work well, but often they're glorified extensions of time. So the idea of a service level agreement, and I recognise that is, just another name for something that's similar, is to have a contract. PPAs are not binding. Be more explicit about what the service is, who's providing it, when are they providing it, and not just planning, but across the whole council. And the developer pays for that. Sasha talked about fees at the start, and we're broadly supportive of higher fees if it means a better service, and disappointed on the ring fencing. But the service level agreement will pay for a service if we get it. And if the service isn't delivered, then the fee is refunded or isn't paid. And there might be incentives built into that as well.
Okay. Thirdly, you say resource the system effectively. I think everybody is saying the same thing, and everybody wants to see more money put into it, and the lack of ring fencing is a problem. You talk about an enhanced funding settlement. I mean, that's what you're talking about, isn't it? Put more money and more resources into local authorities, yeah?
Yes, we do. But we're clear that's for the long term, I think. There's kind of short term and a long term. We would like to see more money go into local authorities and go into planning services. We don't think that is going to happen immediately. We're very supportive of the surge resource idea, the kind of super squad that builds capacity in specific areas. We like this idea of kind of specialised, centralised resource could be delivered through Homes England or other agencies that add capacity and capability for large, complex urban regen. That's the sort of shorter term. In the longer term, I think we should look at the skills that we need in planning, particularly around design, sustainability, carbon, and also the attractiveness of planning as a career, right? Just the pipeline of people entering the profession.
Okay. Now, the fourth recommendation is, and this is an interesting one, encourage proportionate decisions, and they should be taken at the right level. And what you're saying is for bigger schemes, maybe they should be taken at a higher level than the local authority level. Why is that, and how do you see that working? Because most of the mayors, if that's what we're talking about, like Andy Street in Birmingham, don't even have planning powers at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of those things that we put this in there for discussion. I don't think this is kind of fully formed yet, but there is a recognition that very significant strategic schemes can be held up and often refused because of local politics. I think there's an issue about is the decision being made at the same level that the kind of impacts and the benefits are being felt? And look, I should say we have experience, and I can speak for Landsec as well, of delivering very significant regeneration with local authority partners in London. I think we're just saying there is perhaps the option in some cases where that decision might go to the strategic level. And as part of that, harmonising devolution deals, because we recognise it's a complete patchwork. At the moment, you got the strategic authority in London, you got combined authorities. Some of them have planning powers, some don't. They differ. So harmonise that, and then there is possibly a route with quite a high bar, I think, to go from the local to the strategic for the decision.
Okay. And then you say, I'm going to throw this open to the others in a minute, but just to take the fifth recommendation, enable development on brownfield land through national policy, and you dive straight in with criticism of this phrase, gentle densification. Why is that? Why are you critical of gentle densification?
Again, I think there are circumstances where gentle densification will be appropriate, but brownfield urban regeneration is complex and it's expensive. And often, I think, to make development viable, deliver the benefits that local authorities want and communities want, we need to embrace density. We need to be braver, frankly, around density, and that should be underpinned by good planning, good design, good placemaking. There's no reason why that can't happen.
Okay. I mean, what I love about this, if I may say, just to step away from the detail, is how forthright yourselves and Landsec have been about the criticisms of the current system. It's a really straightforward, forthright set of proposals and criticisms. I'm guessing you're probably from Worcestershire as well. Now I'm going to throw that open. Mary, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much. Hi, Mike. Sorry not to be here at the beginning, but great to see you. And my question really is about urban development corporations and whether you see a role for urban development corporations, bearing in mind the scale of the task, really, which I mean, the scale of the opportunity is something that you've identified clearly in your report in terms of the scale of the opportunity for brownfield regeneration. But do you think there's a role for development corporations? And do you think, if there is, those development corporations need to be given planning powers?
I do. Yes, we are supportive of development corporations in principle. I think where they can be particularly useful is in economic growth corridors. I think it could be a role for development corporations in delivering housing. Labour's talked a lot about new towns, but I think there is potential for development corporations in growth corridors, particularly where they cross local authority boundaries. And I mentioned one of the sectors we are getting into is life science and innovation. And I think if we, as a country, are really serious about growing those industries, there may be a role for development corporations in pushing particular sectors and economic clusters, which is about sort of speed and certainty. So I think, yes, you could envisage them having planning powers as part of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Sasha, do you have a question?
Thank you, Chris. Michael, I know Paul and I have mentioned this, but we just both Paul's in the middle of a very tricky urban appeal, and I just done one in Manchester 2 weeks ago. And my experience is promoting urban brownfield sites is as difficult, if not more difficult, than greenfield sites. It just is. So I just wonder, how do we incentivize developers, frankly, to really take on these challenging, difficult sites and, frankly, give them preference or priority over greenfield development?
I think this might be a sort of unpopular opinion, because I know most people are probably quite anti the infrastructure levy. It could be quite an interesting device, I think. If brownfield development has a lot of the infrastructure it needs, not all, but the infrastructure is there just by the nature of the kind of urban environment it is. Whereas greenfield, a lot of that infrastructure doesn't exist. I wonder if the level of infrastructure could be reflected in the infrastructure levy. It's almost, the infrastructure levy is a kind of tax, isn't it? Rather than it's a developer tax rather than a levy. Yeah. And whether you can start to use it as a tax incentive for brownfield development, where you are developing in areas with existing infrastructure.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you very much. Paul, your question?
Thank you, Chris. Mike, before I ask you the question, can I just thank whoever of our audience was inventive enough to sign me up to the West Sussex County Council news item. So I'm now part of the West Sussex County Council newsletter, beautifully and politely pointing out that, of course, Bosham is in West Sussex, which I know we're having cross-examined in relation to it. I knew as soon as I said South Hampshire, but as a way of gently nudging me, it's well done. So whoever did that, thank you. That was perfect. And apologies to the residents of West Sussex and Hampshire. Having said that, Mike, now that you know I'm geographically dyslexic, but my point sort of leads on from both your report and also Sasha's question, which is, are we getting it right in terms of national guidance, in terms of how we put forward priorities? So national policy tells us how we have to build beautifully, tells us how we have to respect heritage assets, a strong presumption in relation to protecting heritage assets, how we have to make sure that we don't affect the living conditions of existing residents, and also tells us we've got to increase efficiency in urban areas. In other words, we've got a series of competing, almost impossibly to reconcile objectives. So if we really do want to prioritise brownfield, should we really be revisiting the presumption in favour of sustainable development and have a subpart which says there's a presumption in favour of delivering efficient use of brownfield land in urban areas? Because without that, as I think Mike Johnson said in response to one of the points about Bradford having a 35% uplift, it is impossible to see how you would ever achieve a 35% uplift, even if, like Newcastle, you're saying you're not going to do that till after 2031. Fingers crossed for a change of government. Your thoughts?
Yes, I agree entirely on the presumption. And I think there has to be some policy prioritisation, whether that is in the plan or by the authority. And I think, there's lots of good authorities out there who are really clear on what their vision is as an authority and what their red lines are. And I think you need that clarity from the local authority to deliver urban regeneration because of the complexity. If you try and do everything, as you say, in terms of policy complexity, but in terms of cost, it's very hard to make these developments work. And I think there's a kind of tonal point, isn't there, about the system that, often it feels like it's there to sort of prevent and delay rather than kind of promote and enable.
No, thank you. It feels more like therapy than a question, so thank you for assisting me with that, Mike.
And I think you will never live West Sussex down now, Paul.
Never, ever. No, thank you.
You won't be allowed back in. We've had a lot of audience questions, and we've got some time. So I'm going to ask.
I've got one too.
Sorry, Charlie. Sorry, I can't see you.
No,
far away.
No, I have got one. Forgive me if, because I've been ducking it out of reception, so forgive me if you sort of preface this or foreshadow this already, Mike, but you were talking about density and densification. Is it your view that, at least for brownfield sites, the Nicholas Boy Smith Office for Place vision of gentle densification, building better, placemaking, building beautiful, is pie in the sky? And if so, does that in practice mean that we're heading for a situation where it's flats in the cities, houses in the suburbs?
So I think density can be beautiful without being gentle, right? If so, at Canada Water, it's 53 acres. So that's quite an extreme example of regen. 26 acres of parks, right? There's a huge amount of green space. 12 acres of parks, 26 new streets and space. but it's a dense development. But the aspiration has always been that the urban design and the architecture is the kind of highest quality. I didn't necessarily see a conflict with what Office for Place are doing. And I think there's place for gentle density, for sure, in the suburbs, but we need to be a bit bolder in the urban centres.
Thanks, Mike.
Now, something I just wanted to say is the sixth recommendation is you want tax incentives. You're asking for tax incentives on urban regeneration, capital allowances and so on. And it sort of ties in with the question that Paul mentioned that Mark Johnson has raised. He says, how do you deliver urban housing in Bradford city centre, a 35% uplift authority, when build costs are higher than sales values? So you can't even sell them for what they cost. And that's a particular problem as you start to go up, I think, over about 4 or 5 stories. So 2 points, really. Why do you need tax incentives to deliver these sites? Why those?
I think there's 2 points. I mean, you've touched on it. Like brownfield development is complex and expensive. There's a lot of upfront cost. That also means there's a lot of upfront risk for developers. So I think we're saying, can we help with the cost point with a sort of capital allowances model? We'd suggested it might be for upfront infrastructure or remediation costs, but also kind of just and helping sort of de-risk some of that upfront capital, before you've got on and even started building, really.
I completely get that. The scheme I did in Coventry recently, Andy Street put up £6 million. It's a fraction of the total cost, but it de-risked that initial impetus to sort of encourage you to leap into those sites. And linked to that, Mark's question, when build costs are higher, often for more creative buildings and taller buildings, how can you make it work? Because you can't make it work in some cities like Bradford and even more affluent cities like Manchester and Birmingham. Generally, these schemes deliver very little affordable housing. So, what's the solution to that? Because we're in desperate need of affordable housing.
Yeah, we are. And if I take Canada Water as an example, we talked about this a bit earlier. Canada Water is delivering 35% affordable housing. I think it's probably three things that help it to do that. I mean, first of all, obviously, is location. It's in a London. Density, which we've talked about a lot, but also flexibility. 7 million square foot master plan, 10-year project, 3,000 homes. There's a lot of work, over 2.5 million square feet of workspace, and there's quite a lot of flexibility about what gets delivered when. And I think we need to be flexible about the phasing to allow kind of cross subsidy across those phases. So we're sort of building the right development at the right time.
So, I mean, to cut to the chase, what you're saying is, can we have the affordable at the back end of the development because we've got so many upfront costs on this brownfield site in the early phases?
I mean, the first building we completed at Canada Water was an affordable block, which Southwark have forward funded, right? So they bought that, and Southwark are master development partner at Canada Water. So you can still develop affordable housing in the early phases. But yeah, I think there's a bit of flexibility about what comes when in terms of kind of tenure and quantum.
Okay. And obviously, as you say, I mean, London is almost a different country. It is going to be more challenging outside of London, isn't it, to deliver affordable housing on these brownfield sites. But your point would be, well, maybe some public subsidy to that.
Maybe some public subsidy. And I guess it goes back to that point that, do we think urban regeneration is a good outcome? And whilst it's about housing, delivering affordable housing, it is also about economic development and growth and jobs.
Yeah, well, that's certainly been done very, very successfully in Manchester. No question about that. Great. Thank you very much indeed, Mike. Absolutely fascinating. Really clear ideas. I know that has been read by politicians, as you say, either side of the aisle. And back to you, Charlie.
Thanks very much, Chris. And thanks, Mike, for me too. I've literally just finished my cab journey. Fancy that. Perfect timing. Still not on screen, though. And that's there I are. Here I can prove that I have got to my destination. Thank you. Really fascinating discussion. Actually, some real head scratching to do in light of that. Actually, really, really interesting indeed. And so we're very, very grateful for you to come on the show. And we'll make sure. I think Chris will make sure we circulate a link to the report on our website so people can download it and view it. So thank you all for joining us, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time. I look forward to welcoming you all then. Take care. Good evening.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mike.